Good morning on another Wednesday here in Pittsburgh. This is the Trib Live Radio Morning Show. Josh Taylor in studio, joined by Jerry DePaula, Pitt beat writer for the Trib. And Jerry, I wanted to start with an issue that's come up recently, and it's kind of I guess you can say it's a new rule that's been passed by the NCAA, and some coaches have apparently taken advantage of it. Some don't tend to like it, but we'll get into that in just a moment. But for those of you out there, if you've seen your favorite college football coaches on social media, if they have a lot of retweets going right now on your timeline, there's a reason behind that. There's a rule that's been passed, I believe it's called Proposition 2015-48, that kind of loosens the restrictions to a degree on what certain college football coaches can and can't do on social media. And it has become a very, very interesting situation. And you mentioned right before we went to air here how Pat Narduzzi's been pretty active. So if you're following Pat Narduzzi, you see a lot of Pat Narduzzi retweets, this rule's probably why.
These are retweets from tweets from months ago.
Right.
You know, when I think I saw one the other day from the quarterback, Pickett, their quarterback in the class of 2017, tweeted something about Pitt, or I'm committing to Pitt, and Narduzzi retweets it.
And let's be clear, we're talking about recruits here. We're not just talking about retweeting anybody. I mean, that's different. We're talking about recruits.
He doesn't waste his time with you and me. You know?
Right, exactly. We're talking about recruits who haven't signed national letters of intent yet. So
right.
there's a little bit more of a looser restriction on what coaches can and can't do.
But they can't talk about it.
Right.
That really gets in my craw. You know, they can do everything else with these recruits. They can call their mom. They can retweet them a million times. But, you know, heaven forbid if you ask about one of those guys in a news conference or just in general off-the-record conversation, oh, I can't talk about that. You know, it's. I think the NCAA rule is silly. You know, these guys are always calling these guys and tweeting these guys and Facebooking them, but they can't make an off-the-record comment to a reporter. I mean, maybe that's
or an on-the-record comment.
Yeah, I can, on the record, I guess. I'll give him that. You know, just even off the record. Maybe he doesn't trust me. Maybe that's the problem.
Maybe.
Yeah.
And you and Pat Narduzzi have had you've gone around in circles here and there.
Yeah,
so
you know what?
He's
okay. You know, him and I, we do have our.
It's a mutual respect.
Yeah, a little bit of mutual respect, and I got to sit down with him, break bread with him at the ACC meetings in Charlotte 2 weeks ago. I introduced him to my wife, and he was very gracious. And in fact, he said to me, he says, "How long you been married, Jerry?" I said, "Well, 38 years." He said, "How could she put up with you for that long?" I said, "Coach, how can you put up with me every day?"
Good point. Now, speaking of, because we're talking about putting up with you, and camp starts next week. These guys are getting into it on Sunday. So right. I imagine there's a lot of different storylines you're looking forward to going into this, things you're paying attention to.
Yeah, there's a lot of things going on with Pitt, and these are things that have been going on since the spring. One of the things that people may not realize, you're looking for a backup quarterback. Heaven forbid if Nathan Peterman gets hurt or plays poorly, against that tough schedule, what kind of recourse, what kind of alternative does the Narduzzi and offensive coordinator Matt Canada have? Well, in the spring, Manny Stalker, the walk-on. He's still a walk-on as far as I know. He could have gotten a scholarship by now. Narduzzi doesn't usually call me and tell me those things when he does them, but he may get a scholarship by the end of training camp. But he is a walk-on right now, and he had a pretty good spring. He's an athletic kid. He's a big kid. Moves around, a little better than Peterman. Although Peterman has pretty good feet. So he could be the backup quarterback, but they're also on depth chart. This in the media guide that they just released. There's that word "or" is in there for the backup. It's either Manny Stalker or Ben DiNucci, the kid from Pine Ridge School. But that's something to watch this summer during training camp. The other thing is, of course, trying to find a go-to wide receiver. I have the feeling that Dantes Ford, senior transfer, he started out at Syracuse, went to Stowe Rocks High School. He was hurt through much of the spring drills. Came back near the end of the spring drills, and he looks like he made some catches last year, some nice catches, and he has a little bit of athleticism to him. He's not Tyler Boyd, but he might be somebody that might step up. But the other guys have to step up, and the one guy that the coaches really are pushing is Jester Weah, the sprinter from Wisconsin, who can run like a deer and a big, strong kid, too. He was a sprinter, a state championship sprinter in high school in Wisconsin, recruited by Paul Christ. He just can't catch the ball that well. If he can ever get his feet and his hands going together with his eyes, I think he's going to be a pretty good receiver. But those are things that Pitt's going to be looking for early in camp. And
we, of course, as Jerry mentioned it, they get into it on Sunday, so we're about, 4 days away from Pitt camp kicking off here.
Short summer.
I'm sure we will get into a lot of different things here, especially as the season comes along, because the schedule becomes an issue, and you and I have talked a lot about that schedule, so I'm sure we'll get into those things and more as the season gets closer and closer here on Trib Live Radio.